I would love to say that I'm doing the rest of this all in one video just to get it all done and over with. That would be great. But the truth is, the longer the video gets, the more difficult, more frustrating and exhausting the whole process of editing is. And that's exactly how the last week of this entire build went. Before we start, let's give some quick context first. The last few videos have been kind of all over the place on this build, jumping back and forth in time to cover each individual thing. I wanted to keep doing that here, but this whole last week of the build, everything was so deeply intertwined with each other that it would have been impossible to just cover painting and then hand painting, detailing, and the suit was being built for Sci-Fi Valley Con in June. The costume contest was going to be on Saturday at 6 p.m. Painting hasn't even been started yet, and we're in Monday. Alright, so to give you an idea of just how far behind I really was, a lot of the stuff that I showed you in the last couple of videos, a lot of that actually was happening on Monday and Tuesday. But anyway, before I could even paint anything, the surface of everything needed to be prepped first. I started off by putting rivets on everything. I was going to show this in a detail video, but that was going on for way too long. I probably should have. But these are all googly eyes of various sizes. Large, medium, small, you name it. Just whatever felt right for that specific spot. A little bit of contact cement in the back, and just slapped it to wherever was needed. Some things I needed to measure out, like on the pauldrons and stuff like that. But for the most part, I was able to eyeball most of them. But once all the googly eyes were on for our fake rivets, it came time to do all the sealing, covering up all the seam work and whatnot. This was all just done with a cup of water and some quick seal. Yeah, I was way too far behind to do any heat sealing, and I wanted to give everything a second coat of quick seal as well to make some things a little more smoother. But I was so far behind, I had to start cutting corners. And this was one of the main reasons I was wearing rubber gloves while doing this. I could literally just squeeze out a bunch on the surface, dip my whole hand in water, and then just go crazy, spreading all over the whole piece. It was an insanely fast and efficient way of getting it done. Not super clean, but it was filling the gaps for the most part. I did run out of quick seal twice while doing this. My girlfriend made a couple emergency trips for me while doing this, and I ended up running out again in the middle of the night, and I had to wait until the morning to buy some more. And with the sealing all done, I erased everything on my little dry erase board, which was my to-do list that I had been working on, and started working on a list for paint prep and all that fun stuff to get that all ready for the next day. So I got up bright and early, about 5 p.m. because I'm a night shift guy, and I brought everything outside to both prime and paint all in one go at the same time. I took everything out to the backyard, way in the back behind some trees I had, just to make sure that no overspray was going to get on anything, not my car, not the house, nothing. Started all out with a layer of primer first. This is your usual black plasti dip that everybody uses. I can't remember exactly how many cans I used through the whole thing, but it was a lot. Just to make sure I did have enough the entire time, I started buying cans weeks in advance, probably about 3-4 weeks in advance. And every time I'd go to the store, be it Walmart, Home Depot, or wherever, I would buy 4 or 5 cans and just take them home. So by the time I started this, I had such a stockpile, I didn't have to worry about running out or going to the store, or worst case scenario, the store being out of stock. With each individual piece, I did the primer first, and then afterwards, I would hit it with paint. This was just satin black paint from Rust-Oleum. And for each piece, I'd do primer, let it dry, and then I'd hit it with the black paint. Then I'd let that dry. Once it was done, I took it in the house, brought back another piece, same process over and over again. I kept doing that until the sun went down. The first day, or I guess you could say it the second day really, I only got about half of everything painted, mostly because I did wake up so late, but I'm also a night shift guy. It's hard for me to wake up any earlier. But once the sun came down, I went inside and I did what little work I could with what I had already painted. I couldn't do any more detail work, obviously, because everything was already sealed. First thing I did was I started working on the visor for the helmet. This took a lot longer than it looks because I don't show it here, but I actually had another visor in the helmet already and glued in. After a couple measurements and adjustments to things, the visors I did want in would fit, but it meant I had to dig out the old ones first, and that almost ruined the whole helmet because I had overglued the original visor in. But the ones I am putting in now and here are basically like Rave goggles, or like a Rave visor. They're the ones that have like the batteries and the buttons on the side with LEDs that lights up the whole visor. That's what I used for this, and that's what I wanted in it. The only thing I had to do really was to pop out the entire housing for the LEDs, the batteries, and the buttons and switches, and turn them inside out. Because the way these visors normally are, the batteries and buttons are on the outside of the glasses. But with these inside the helmet, that would then be facing up against the foam, and I wouldn't be able to change batteries out or turn them on. So I had to take them out and flip them inside so the battery and the buttons were both facing my face. That way when I took the helmet off and on, I could change batteries out, press the buttons, throw the helmet on, and it'd all be fine. For the metal, I used a metallic metal paint from Walmart. This was with a dry brushing technique. I didn't try to fill in any gaps. I just wanted to hit the topmost surface that my brush could easily reach. Everything else stayed untouched, so just the upmost highest peaks of everything. So large flat surfaces, anything that was up, but any kind of cracks and stuff, that would be untouched. And while I had the gunmetal out, I started on the sword as well. Some spots of this would be gold, but I thought it'd be a decent base for the gold to lay on. I don't think it mattered that much in the end. Probably just wasted more time while doing this. And then I hit it all with a metallic gold. Same brand and style of paint as the gray. This was all from Walmart, from the craft section. But this was what I meant by how previously laying down the base of silver was kind of a waste of time, because all I really needed to do was just lay that gold on a little bit more thick, and it was going to pick up fine either way. And the red paint was the same exact acrylic paint that I had used on the inside of my cape in the last video. This required several coats to get it to lay down nice and smooth, and in between each pass you can see I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between the gun and the sword, back to the gun, back to the sword, letting each pass dry as I'm going back and forth between the two. Anything to save myself just a few seconds of time. These weren't done yet and were by no means finished. They still needed some touch-ups, some extra highlights, the outlines done, which I end up doing later. But as you can see in the background, the sun was coming up, or rather the sun was already up. So it was time for bed, get ready for the next day. So the next day I tried getting up just a little bit earlier just so I could finish painting everything in time. I mean, not that much earlier because it was already daylight by the time I laid down, so I probably only got like 4 or 6 hours of sleep and went right back outside. Still wearing the same dirty clothes. Figure I was already covered in paint, or the clothes were already covered in paint, so no point in ruining another pair of clothes. Figure I'd just shower once the sun went down and got everything back inside. That way I had as much daylight outside working on everything. And again, just like the previous day, everything got a coat of black Plasti Dip as primer for the first round, and then after that, satin black for Rust-Oleum. The bigger pieces required a lot of rotating to find all the spots that I missed. I'd rather go way too heavy on the whole thing than end up later missing a spot and not realizing it. But I definitely must have lost some footage for sure. But the backpack definitely gave me the worst time, because the only mounting spot I had on that thing was the mounting hardware for the backpack to attach to the body. And needless to say, it fell in the grass. I had to wait for it to dry, pick it back up, brush it off, try and clean it up as best I could, remount it, and then paint it again. It was a nightmare. And thankfully by the time the sun came down, everything outside was painted. So I was able to take everything inside and get to work on hand painting everything. So I had the idea of mimicking the blue highlighting that you see on a lot of the minis. To do this, I used a metallic blue, which is just like the gold and the silver that I had previously used. Yeah, I was a little conflicted on this though, because this entire time so far I was fully referencing the action figure from Joy Toy and not the minis. While they are the same characters, there's a lot of subtle differences, and that was starting to stray away from what I was mostly focusing on. So this slight deviation was just itching at the back of my head the entire time, from the very first to last brush stroke. The highlights didn't look that bad. They actually looked okay, but the shine on the black paint was what was bothering me. It was just way too shiny. On the can, it said that it was satin, but the final result looked like a heavy gloss, and it made every imperfection on the pieces pop. Every seam, every bit of quick seal, every bad edge, or an uneven spot of paint, it made it show from a mile away. But at the time, I didn't know if I had time to deal with it, so I just dealt with it and I just moved on. The next thing to paint then was the pauldrons. Again, this thread took several coats to get a consistent color. and by now you're probably seeing me use my phone's flashlight a lot to paint. The lighting in my basement isn't the best. Then throw in the fact that trying to paint black armor, that makes it even harder to see. Fortunately, I didn't have that many paint mess ups though, and if I did, a quick wipe cleaned it right up. It's acrylic paint, so it takes a while to dry. As long as I'm on top of it, it's not going to cause me any real problems. As for the skulls, that was just a random tan color that I found from my bin of acrylic paint. Nothing super fancy on that. Just a 2-3 dry brush passes just to get it all done. And the pauldrons were complete for now. They were a little bit bright, but they were at least done, or done enough. And I managed to accomplish everything that I wanted to do that night. So it was done and done on time, and that's what mattered. So I started the day off with some sewing. The elbow and knee covers were my top priority. Fortunately, I had some leftover Yaya Han fabric that I had used on my Terminator chaplain suit. I can't remember the exact fabric type for what it was, but it had kind of like a rubbery texture on the one side, and it was kind of elastic. But it was the exact texture I wanted for the elbow and knee covers, and it looked great on my Terminator, so I had just enough to use for this. Yeah, because I had ran some measurements, and I realized that yes, I did have literally the exact amount needed for the elbows and knees. I mean, down to the inch is what it was. I had nothing left to spare. If I wanted to do anything else, like say the hips or the neck, I'd have to go get more, and I'd get them only if I had the time, which I did not. So the elbows and knees and all the joints on your Space Marine suits, it's kind of like an accordion style fabric on all the joints. So to get this look with fabric, I believe I measured out every 1.5 inches. Then I would fold at that spot, sew it, go to the next one, fold to that spot, and then sew it. It was an insanely tedious process, but I think it only took me like maybe 2 hours to do. I had 2 giant sheets of fabric for this. One was going to be for the knees and the other was going to be for the elbows. So I had to do all this twice with each one. I can't remember off the top of my head how many folds it actually was in the end, but it was a lot. If I remember off the top of my head, I think like one of them was like 10 and the other was like 15 or something like that. But each time I folded, I would pin it just to make sure everything stayed in place. And by the time I finished all the rows, I somehow ran out of thread exactly on the last row. I mean, down to like 1 or 2 wraps left on the spool. There was how close I got to the end of finishing that was just mind-blowingly insane. I could have ran out of thread, and I surprisingly didn't. I figured this was fine though. I wasn't wearing the costume until Saturday, so I figured I'd just pick up some thread after the con on Friday and just finish sewing it up when I got home, and then just attach it then. No big deal. It would have been easy to take care of, maybe a couple hours. I mean, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Because aside from that, the suit was pretty much done. All it needed was just one more test fit, just to make sure everything was okay, nothing was wrong. This was around the time I got a surprise visit from my honey and our kitty cat, Sable. While I was doing all of this, in the background I was also doing adjustments and fixes for her suit, which was the Sister Battle suit. We ended up doing a test fit for her after this. I don't show any of her stuff, but her test fit went great. Everything fit great, the adjustments worked, because the suit was originally made for my sister, but we've made adjustments so now my girlfriend can wear it. But they're about the same height, but their bodies are different, so some things had to be adjusted so that things are more comfortable, and you know what I mean. During this test fit, I still hadn't attached the backpack or anything major like that. I mainly just wanted to make sure what I had was looking good, in terms of like color, everything matching together, you know, pieces up against another, as long as their colors were consistent and all that stuff. The bottom half didn't look that bad, but once the upper half went on, I knew something was wrong. This was wrong. This was all wrong. Nothing looked right. Everything was like way too bright. The colors were way too vibrant. This was just not what I wanted. And I had just spent the last 2 days hand painting all of it. And I only had one night left to get this ready for the convention. I was in a panic. So my very short list of things I needed left to do had just gotten a lot longer. For starters, I should have referenced the figure for all of my colors. The pauldrons were just way too bright. However, the cape was dead on. Like, when I was shopping, I must have had a good reference picture, and it was exactly the color that I needed. So thankfully, that was good. But on the figure, all the reds match. The cape, the pauldron, the weapons, like, it's all consistent. So these photos you're seeing, these are the reference photos that I took when I went to the store, which we were going to hit after our day at the convention on Friday night. But therein lied kind of a problem. I wouldn't be able to really work on anything until the afternoon because we'd be at the convention. So I did get up a couple hours early before we were going to the convention because I had another issue I needed to tackle while the sun was still out, and that was that glossy finish. Because, like I said, it picked up everything. Every imperfection, every seam, and it didn't just pick it up, it drew your attention to it. I should have used a matte paint rather than a satin, but that was okay because I had matte clear spray paint in the house. So I took everything back outside and dulled that shine down. I hit everything with a decent layer of matte clear coat, and that surprisingly did the job. That got rid of not all the shine, but it got rid of most of it. It made all those seams and spots of quick seal so much less noticeable. Or at the very least, it didn't draw your eyes to them anymore, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want you to look at the imperfections. I just wanted you to see the whole thing as a whole, and that pulled your attention away from those. Unfortunately, this also made the blue highlights pop even more. I don't know if it was the matte clear coat that did it, or it's just the bad lighting in the basement, and now having it outside, I was able to see it more. But those blue highlights stuck out like a sore thumb now. They needed to go. And my now already long to-do list is now even longer. And this ended up cutting down our time at the convention on Friday even lower. Like, originally I was going to go roller skating Friday night after the convention, which is what I do every year as kind of like a celebratory, we did it kind of celebration thing, but not this year. That 3-hour session, I needed that in the basement, and I needed about 10 more of that. So first thing on the night's to-do list after the convention, came time to restain the cape and tabard. In the last test fit the night before, they were just way too bright. I went through probably 2 or 3 cups of coffee and honestly just drenched everything, going as far as just dipping the entire tabard into a cup of coffee. The cape got the same treatment, just the white side though. Once they were done, I left them both hang all night with a fan underneath them to dry them out. This also kind of helped give the tabard a more like wrinkly and worn look too. And it was time to tackle paint again. I needed these pauldrons way darker, and I knew just painting over them wasn't going to be enough. So I re-blacked everything out first and just started over. When I was at the store, I took those reference photos that I had shown earlier with me to try and find the exact color that I wanted. And the red that I wanted at the store, they didn't have enough. I think they only had 2 bottles. So I got the next darkest one, which they had plenty of. When I bought it, I was aware that it was a matte acrylic paint, and after several coats, it was clear that it needed something a shade brighter and something with a little more gloss. It was time to start mixing paints. Thankfully, I found out pretty quick that all I really needed to do to get the exact color I wanted was to do a 2-to-1 mix. 2 drops of this stuff and then 1 drop of a regular gloss red, and that got me the exact color that I wanted. So on top of what I had already put on, I gave it 1 or 2 more coats, and we got the red that we needed. And finally, the night was heading in the right direction. I gave the same mix of red to the weapons as well. Like I said, the red is supposed to be consistent throughout the entire suit. So from the cape, pauldrons, sword, gun, and all that. Unfortunately, to get it to match exactly like it would with the pauldrons, I'd have had to have repeated that process of painting everything black again. But I didn't want to waste that much time, especially considering the sword is such a huge piece. So I just gave it a quick once over on top of the red that was already there. The weapons are not now as dark as everything else, but they are darker. So it's passable. And I can always go back at them later on down the road and give them one more just to get that. Or I could even paint them all black and just do it right. But they look okay as they are now. And once those were done, came time to deal with those blue highlights. While at the store, I also purchased a black metallic paint. My hope for this paint was for it to do one of two things. At best, just cover the blue, and that's it. And at worst, it would replace the blue with a dark gray outline. Either would have been fine, either would have been less of an eyesore as the blue. Thankfully, it only covered up the blue, and you don't really see the cover up at all. In hindsight, the dark gray highlights probably wouldn't look that bad. I'll probably keep it in mind when I go to do my upgrades later, and I might or I might not. It depends on how I feel. And once all the painting was done, I went back to finish up the sewing. I bought a new spool of thread as well when I was at Walmart with all my other stuff I needed to get. And I started lining up the folds in the fabric and started pinning everything in place. All I had to do was more or less just wrap the piece around, line up those folds, and just sew straight down the middle. Nothing was going to go wrong, right? I mean, I'm just sewing a straight line. Nothing should have gone wrong. Something went wrong. I still don't know what was happening with the sewing machine. Maybe it was just the fabric. I mean, it was sewing over two folds, which would be 3 pieces on one side, 3 pieces on another from the 2 folds and then fabric below it. So that should be 6 pieces of fabric that it's sewing, all with a rubbery texture on the one side. So maybe that's what was happening. But for some reason, anytime it passed over a fold, it would just stop sewing altogether. Whatever internal mechanisms inside the sewing machine causes it to like wrap around and all that stuff to loop into itself, it would stop doing that and it would just leave a string behind. It was no longer actually sewing. I spent probably an hour or two just trying to figure out what was wrong with the machine. I took another piece of fabric, I tried sewing it, I tried folding it and sewing it, and every time there was no problems. The red fabric that I had left over from my purity seals, it had no problems with those whatsoever, and it just sewed them fine. So I can only assume that it was something with this many layers with this type of fabric. But I was wasting so much time just trying to get it to work, and I was in such a panic at this point because I still had stuff to do. And what I decided to do was I just decided to start and stop sewing in between every fold. It would take longer than just a straight line, but I was already wasting so much time just trying to figure out why it wasn't working. It took a lot longer to do, but it at least got done. After that, I grabbed some spare elastic threads and sewed them in 4 corners on both the top and bottom of all 4 pieces. Elbows, elbows, knees, knees, top half, bottom half. And this was going to be how I was going to attach each piece to the upper arms and the lower arms, the upper legs to the shins, all with some good old hot glue. I did do a little bit of a goof. I was supposed to run the pre-existing clips and straps from the joints inside of the covers, but in a rush I somehow completely forgot about it. But that's okay, I can address that later down the road now that the suit's all done, but that can all be addressed later. They're hard to see anyway. unless you're really, really up close looking at them, because where they are naturally is in the corners of everything, so they're already hard to see. And once those were done, came time to permanently attach the belt to the midsection. From one of my previous test fits, the side strap along the thigh was just a little too tight, and I wanted a little bit more play in that. Plus, I wanted to be able to have a little bit more play in the front too, with the way the belt overlaps and velcros onto itself. So I'd split the belt in the back. That way I could kind of have like an extra inch or two of wiggle room. I kept double checking everything just to make sure everything was in the right position, it was even, the belt was still wrapped up in the front center, but also still giving me as much play as I needed on the side. Kind of holding everything together with tape in the meantime before I started gluing. And once I was happy with where everything was located, I went to town with hot glue. Kind of carved in a couple slots inside the midsection. That way when I applied the hot glue, it had something inside to really grab. That way it had a really good hold. And aside from that, I had done a couple little small things here and there, like attaching the backpack and stuff like that. I needed sleep. It was like 9 in the morning, and we were supposed to leave around noon. So I got myself a good 2-hour nap. Came time for Saturday. So after showering and getting ready, I brought everything outside to load the car up. I figured this was like my last chance for a full test fit to make sure nothing else was going to go wrong, or at the very least hope that the majority of the problems I had were now gone. With all the painting issues not really showing up in the basement, I was worried to death that this was still going to look bad. I hadn't seen it in the daylight yet, or at least not in this stage. After the matte clear, after covering up the highlights, after repainting the reds, I didn't know what these things were going to look like in good lighting. They might not have covered up the blue, the red might be a wrong color in the right light. I had no idea of knowing, and I was terrified during this test fit. And surprisingly, it was looking good. Like, it was looking really good. The difference between this and the last 24 hours beforehand was like night and day. The entire suit changed overnight between what I had put in and what I had the night before. It was such a stark, drastic difference. Up until that moment, I was so hesitant of even taking the suit to the convention. I'm not even joking. On Friday, we were talking to like all of our convention friends and all of our cosplay friends, and every time my suit came up into conversation, I would say, if I got it done, if I can finish it in time. And they would all reply with, yeah, you'll get it done. You're like, it'll get done. You'll be fine. Like, they all had way more confidence in me than I did, but they also didn't see it the night before. So I don't know if that was a them thing or a me thing. Maybe a little bit of both of their confidence versus, I don't know. But there was a stark, drastic change between Friday night and Saturday morning. When we got to the convention, we were texting people as we were going up the parking garage, just letting everyone know that we were there and we were coming in. I had done some measurements prior, and I wasn't 100% sure if the body and backpack were going to fit through the front door, and some of our cosplay friends had offered to help. And I'm always blown away by the support we all give each other at the convention every year. We were met at the car for help, and again at the front door. I'll link both of these people's stuff all in the comments. They're both awesome cosplayers. I could gush about both of their work. They're only 2 of my many cosplay friends from this convention. Cosplay friends are the best. We always seem to have each other's backs, and they're amazing. But I think we got there around 1 or so, and the contest I think was at 6. I had fans both in the chest piece and in the helmet to keep me cool. We walked around for a bit, stopping at a couple friends' booths to say hi, and then came time for the contest. I do apologize for not having enough videos and photos. We were both in costume the whole time, and I always feel weird asking people for help, especially when it comes to like stuff like videos and photos and stuff like that. So most of these videos and photos are either from friends or from the convention's Facebook page. Sci-Fi Valley Con's costume contest, it's all done in one go. Kids, teens, and adults. We were pretty close to last on the list of adults. If I remember right, we were like number 66 or 68, and there was about 80 contestants in the adult category alone. And before the adult category even went out on stage, my chest fans had already died. They were on for probably 6 hours by then. I don't know, you gotta suffer for your art, I guess. But my helmet fans stayed strong. I had them hooked up to a USB battery, and that thing wasn't even half dead by the end of the day. Like it could have kept going all night. When it was my time to go up, I didn't have that much of a chance to like talk much about my costume, which was kind of a bummer because of all the work I'd put into it, especially in the last like 24 hours. I do kind of hope sometime in the future, maybe Sci-Fi Valley Con can do like a pre-judging. That way the contestants can have a more one-on-one with the judges, and they can ask more questions and more things can be explained, like what we had done, what kind of struggles we'd go through for our work. But yeah, when I went up there, more or less like, you got fans in that? I was like, yep. And they're like, all right, here you go. And I think it might have also been that I was so close to the end, and they were probably like, well, let's get the show on the road, let's get it done with. We've already been through however many people so far, and they probably just wanted it to be done. So the doors closed at like 8 or 9, and it was pushing 8 o'clock. So it's understandable. But I still placed. I did get first place in the adult category. I don't know how many trophies I now have at Sci-Fi Valley Con. I don't know, maybe I'll make a video about that later because I can't think off the top of my head, but I have like at least 6. I think there's only 1 year I didn't place. But that said, I wasn't expecting to place at all. Like, with how low my confidence was running on the last 2 days of this build, everyone was like, oh, you're gonna win something, and I was like, yeah, not really. Even though I did get to see myself in the video I recorded during the test fit, my mind was still where I was the night before, you know, when everything was just looking terrible. So I was like worried that I still hadn't seen something, maybe something didn't fit the way it should have, and something didn't look right. Because when you're in costume, you have no idea what you look like, you know, unless you have enough videos and photos from beforehand. I mean, I had that once before with my Terminator chaplain. I was walking around for an entire convention day, just on a regular walk around, and my one pauldron was not seated properly. This was like years ago, like maybe 2-3 years ago. It kind of worked to my advantage though, because when I'd take my pictures, it looked like my shoulder was cocked up like I was ready to like charge, but really it was just the pauldron was just up, wasn't mounted properly. But I'm rambling. Oh, and the costume contest, it was not without fail. I seem to have a wardrobe malfunction during every costume contest. This time around, it was during the trophy call. I was walking out to get my trophy, and my foot must have snagged on something, and the rubber seal on the base of my toe fell off. Luckily, my girlfriend was right behind me, and she picked it up, so I can reattach it later. And that concludes the build and the series, I guess. I wish I had more convention footage, but I'm just one guy. I don't have a camera crew or anything like that. Also, the suit will be upgraded. I'll be doing fixes and adjustments and all that other kind of stuff. Just like my previous suits, like the year after it's all done. For like the next, I'll still wear the same suit for a couple years on my off days. So like Saturdays are always the costume contest, so Friday and Sunday I tend to wear other things. And then Saturday is just the competition suit that I had made that year. So as the years go, I'll continue to upgrade my previous suits. So for example, the Terminator Chaplain has been upgraded maybe 3-4 times now with all kinds of extra stuff. This is going to be the same way. My list of updates and upgrades I want to do is long. I'd give a full list of everything, but let's see, like I want to remake the tabard. I want to make it wider so it's got more floof in the middle. The backpack either needs made smaller or shrunken down. I do want to also remake the cape. I want to make it wider, or at least have it stick out a little bit more, because right now it is decently wide, but it all just comes straight down and hangs. And there's probably a laundry list of other things that I need to do as well that I can't think of off the top of my head. I'll have to write it down and make a list. But when the time comes to do all that stuff, I'll make sure I put it all in a video, and then I'll throw it at the end of this playlist. So somewhere within maybe the next year, this suit will probably have a bonus episode in this series. Well, without rambling for too long, now that the build is done, what's coming up next? Right now, I'm planning on doing 1 to 2 small mini projects, like props and stuff like that. And then by then, it'll be time to start working on my Halloween costume. No idea what that'll be. I'm not going to announce anything that early. I'll cover all that when the time comes. But I would like to thank those of you that have stuck with this series the entire time. This suit made me crazy, and I think you might almost be just as crazy as me now. And in the weird chance that you stumbled across this video first, I have an entire series covering this build. This is like episode 17. So if you want to get as crazy as the rest of us, I'll put a link somewhere, or just go to my page and find that. Alright, so I'm out of here. I would say that I need some R&R, but my next project is literally on the table over there. I'll rest when I'm dead, apparently. Later.